My dad lifted his glass like he was about to bless the room. But instead he said, "Some kids make you proud. Others just take up space." Everyone laughed. I smiled and said, "Good thing I just got my own place 3,000 miles away. Don't worry, you'll never have to make space for me again." The table went silent. Forks froze midair. Even my brother Mason stopped smirking. My mother looked down at her plate, picking at her food like she could disappear into it. The quiet stretched longer than I could bear. This wasn't the first time my father had made a cutting remark. But something in me snapped that night. I wasn't the little girl who would shrink into the corner anymore. I wasn't the daughter who accepted his approval as a rare gift. I wasn't even the one who stayed silent to keep the peace. Growing up, I was always the one who faded into the background. My brother, Mason, was the golden child, the one whose every move was celebrated. I couldn't even remember when it started, but it didn't matter. His football trophies lined the hallway like a shrine, and I had no space to display anything of my own. I learned early that to be noticed was to stir up trouble. So, I stayed out of the way. When I brought home my science awards, Dad would barely glance up. "That's nice, Nora. Don't make your brother feel bad," he'd say, his voice soft, but carrying the weight of everything unspoken. Mom wasn't cruel, but she never stood up for me either. Her silence hurt more than anything Dad ever said. She had this way of folding napkins, of stirring pots that didn't need stirring, as if to avoid any conflict. Her silence taught me that my feelings were too much, that I was too much. I learned to keep my head down, to do what was expected without asking for more. The basement became my refuge. It smelled like metal, dust, and something safe, something no one could take from me. I spent hours down there, fixing radios, rebuilding old keyboards, soldering wires. Machines didn't care about favorites. They only cared if you listened. But more than that, they gave me a sense of control. In a house where nothing was mine, I could make things work the way I wanted. Grandma Eleanor was the only one who ever truly listened. On Saturdays, she would visit, bringing pastries in her warm, knowing eyes. She'd sit at my workbench, asking about my projects, encouraging me when no one else would. "You see the world differently, Nora," she'd say. "Don't let anyone tell you that's wrong." Her words were soft, as if she knew what went on behind closed doors, as if she knew how my family never saw me for who I really was. But that Thanksgiving, when Dad made his joke, it hit different. I had long since moved away, built a life for myself 3,000 miles away. I worked nights, I saved, and I earned the scholarship that no one congratulated me for. The space between us felt so wide at that moment, and for the first time, I realized that no matter how far I ran, my father would never look at me the way I needed him to. He'd never see me. But that night, as I smiled and said what I said, I knew I wasn't the invisible girl anymore. I wasn't the girl trying to make space for herself. I'd already made my space. As I drove away from the house, the streets of Indianapolis seemed to grow quieter, as if the city itself was holding its breath. I had just left behind a family that didn't know how to see me, a family that would never be what I needed. The cold air through the open window felt sharp, like a reminder that I wasn't part of their world anymore. I could still hear the echoes of their laughter at the dinner table, the way my father had raised his glass with that smug look on his face, pretending it was all a joke. I wasn't the little girl anymore. I wasn't the one who waited for their approval. And I wasn't the one who let myself be invisible. I had spent years trying to fit into the role they had carved out for me, a role I never chose. It didn't matter how much I succeeded. It didn't matter how hard I worked. No matter what I did, I was always in the shadow of Mason, the golden child. It had always been Mason's trophies on the mantle, Mason's victories on the field, Mason who mattered. I had learned that early, that nothing I did would ever be enough to earn the kind of love or validation my father gave him without question. When I was young, I tried to get their attention. I tried to stand out, but every attempt just seemed to push me further away from them. I remember the time I won my first science award. It wasn't even about the award itself. It was about what happened afterward. I went home that day, waiting for Dad to say something, anything to show that he saw me. Instead, he said, "That's nice, Nora. Don't make your brother feel bad." Just like that. I could feel the weight of the words, the way they made my achievement feel small. And Mason, of course, didn't even notice. He never did. Mom didn't know how to help either. She was scared of conflict, scared of making waves, always trying to smooth things over when things got tense. I never knew if it was because she didn't care enough, or if it was just easier for her to stay silent. I needed her to see me, to stand up for me when Dad's words got too harsh, but she never did. And as time passed, I learned that silence was the only way to survive. If I stayed quiet, if I stayed useful, maybe they wouldn't notice how much they were hurting me. Maybe they'd just leave me alone. When I was 18, I moved away for college, but even then, it wasn't like I was free. I was still trapped by their expectations, by the weight of their love, that was only ever given conditionally. I worked nights, saved every dollar I could, and left for school with nothing but a scholarship and a backpack. I thought that distance would change things, that being away would make my father see me. But distance doesn't change anything when someone refuses to look at you. I thought about all of that as I drove away that night. I thought about how many years I had spent trying to make them see me, trying to prove that I mattered. And I thought about how that Thanksgiving, that one moment, was the turning point. When I smiled and said what I did, something inside me shifted. It wasn't about making them feel bad. It wasn't about revenge. It was about me finally deciding that I would no longer shrink myself to fit into the space they had left for me. I was done. I spent the next few weeks in a haze, replaying the moment over and over in my mind. I hadn't expected it to feel like this, like I was finally breathing for the first time. I was away from them, physically and emotionally, and I didn't know what to do with this new feeling of freedom. But there was something else I hadn't expected. The weight of being free was heavier than I thought. For the first time in years, I felt untethered, and the feeling was both exhilarating and terrifying. That's when Jessica called. We hadn't talked much since I moved to Seattle. She was doing her own thing, trying to make her own way, but she'd always been there when I needed her. "How's everything going?" she asked, her voice familiar and warm over the phone. I took a breath, trying to gather my thoughts. "It's complicated, but better than it's ever been." I didn't know if she understood what I meant. Maybe no one could. But the truth was, I wasn't running from anything anymore. I wasn't hiding in the corner, trying to make myself small enough to disappear. I was standing up, finally, and maybe for the first time, I felt like I deserved to take up space. Jessica didn't push. She never did. She just listened. And for the first time, I realized that maybe I had been pushing people away, too. Maybe it wasn't just my family that needed to see me. Maybe I needed to let others in. But the walls I had built were thick. "Are you coming back for Christmas?" she asked gently, sensing that I was still wrestling with the weight of everything. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the table, the silence, the way they all stayed in their roles as if nothing had changed. "No," I finally said. "I think I'm done going back." Jessica was quiet for a moment, then said, "Well, you've got a place here if you need it." I smiled, even though she couldn't see me. "Thanks, Jess. That means a lot." We hung up, and I sat back, staring out the window. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had a chance to build something different. Something that was mine. Something that wasn't defined by the people who had spent so many years trying to make me invisible. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't running from anything anymore. I wasn't hiding. I was ready to start living. The days after that conversation with Marcus felt different, but not in the way I expected. I thought once I said everything out loud, I'd feel this overwhelming sense of relief. But instead, it was as if a weight had been lifted and replaced with something else, quiet acceptance. I still missed the parts of me I had buried for years. I still struggled with the emptiness that lingered after leaving my family behind. But I also felt a new sense of clarity. I had been carrying so much for so long, and now I was starting to let go of it. Slowly, but steadily. At work, things began to pick up. I had been thrown into a new project, one that tested my skills in ways I hadn't expected. It was demanding, but it was also mine. I didn't have to answer to anyone but myself, and for once, I was excited by the challenge. I had spent so many years waiting for validation, for someone to tell me I was good enough. Now, I was finding that validation in the work itself. It didn't matter if my family ever saw me or appreciated me. What mattered was that I was building something with my own hands. I found myself waking up early to get a head start on the day, spending long hours in the office, and even working weekends. There were no complaints about the long hours or missed social events. I was doing what I loved, what I had always wanted to do. And that felt like freedom. It was like I had finally chosen a path that was mine, not one that was chosen for me. But even as I threw myself into my work, I couldn't escape the thoughts of home. My parents hadn't contacted me after Thanksgiving, and while part of me was grateful for the silence, another part of me couldn't help but wonder if they were even trying to reach out. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe they never had. But I couldn't stop thinking about them, about what I had left behind. And then, one day, I got a message from Grandma Eleanor. "I miss you, sweetheart. How are you?" It had been months since we'd talked. But I felt a sudden pang of longing. Grandma was the only person who had ever really seen me, the only one who had ever told me that I was enough just as I was. I had always felt safe with her, as if I could be myself without fear of rejection. I quickly typed out a response, my fingers moving faster than I could think. "I'm doing well, Grandma. Just busy with work. I miss you too." She replied almost immediately, "Come visit soon, okay? I have a lot to tell you." The next weekend, I found myself on a plane heading back to Indianapolis. I wasn't sure what had made me go, but there was a pull I couldn't ignore. Maybe it was the longing for something familiar, or maybe it was the fact that, despite everything, Grandma was still the one person who made me feel like I mattered. When I arrived, she was waiting for me at the station, her silver hair shining in the sunlight, a warm smile on her face. She looked just as I remembered, strong, but with a softness that made me feel at home. "Come here, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "It's so good to see you." As we drove back to her house, she filled the silence with stories of the neighbors, her gardening tips, and updates on the family. She talked about everyone except my parents. It was as if she knew how much had changed since I left. I didn't bring it up. I didn't need to. When we got to her house, she made us both tea and set it on the porch, where the afternoon sun still warmed the air. The conversation turned to more serious things after a while. "How are you really doing, Gemma?" Grandma asked, her voice steady but soft. "I can tell something's been weighing on you." I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. For so long, I had kept everything inside, buried beneath the surface. But Grandma had a way of making me feel like I didn't have to hide anything. So I told her about Thanksgiving, about what my dad had said, about how much it had hurt. And when I finished, I didn't feel embarrassed or ashamed. I just felt understood. Grandma took a slow sip of her tea, her eyes never leaving mine. Your father has always been hard on you, Gemma. You were never the problem. He was just too busy holding on to his own image to see what was right in front of him. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so many years thinking that if I had been better, if I had just done more, maybe things would have been different. But in that moment, I realized that it wasn't about me at all. It was about him. And maybe that was the hardest part to accept. I had been trying to earn something that was never mine to take. I didn't want to leave, Grandma, I said quietly. But I don't think I had a choice. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Grandma reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. You did the right thing, Gemma. You need to take care of yourself now. You can't keep putting everyone else first. Not if it means losing yourself. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had made the right decision. The path ahead was still uncertain. But I was learning to trust myself, to stop waiting for someone else to tell me I was good enough. Maybe, just maybe, I had to be the one to do that for myself. As the sun set behind the trees, casting a warm golden glow over everything, I realized something important. I had already begun to rebuild my life. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close. But it was mine. And that was enough. The call came on Christmas Day, just as I was finishing up the last of the dishes. My hands were still warm from the soapy water when my phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't recognize the number, but something in me knew. My father. It had been months since I heard from him, and even then, our conversations had been more awkward than anything. But something about this call felt different. I debated whether or not to pick up. Part of me wanted to ignore it. I'd made it this far without hearing his voice, without having to deal with whatever judgment or guilt trip was waiting for me. But another part of me felt like I had no choice but to answer. Like I had to face this, no matter how much I wanted to keep pretending that it didn't matter anymore. Hello, I said, my voice neutral but tight. There was a pause on the other end. Then, it's your father, we need to talk. I swallowed hard. What is it? Dad, you've made quite a mess of things, he said, his tone cold, but laced with something sharper underneath. The whole town's talking about you, about your Christmas dinner. People are asking why you've replaced your real family. Your cousin posted some nonsense about how Nora finally built her own table. Do you have any idea how that makes us look? The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I was silent for a moment, processing. It wasn't anger I felt, but something colder. I didn't post anything, I said, trying to stay calm. I didn't ask anyone to talk about me. But maybe it's not about how it makes you look. Maybe it's about how it makes me feel. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. This isn't about you feeling good about yourself, Nora. This is about family. You can't just run off and expect there to be no consequences. You've embarrassed us. We've had people coming up to us, asking what happened. And your mother. My mother doesn't need to be involved in this. I interrupted, the words coming out before I could stop them. She's the one who's always stayed silent, who's always let you make all the decisions. But I'm not going to keep pretending everything's fine, when it's not. There was a long silence. I could almost hear the tension crackling through the phone. You think you're so much better than us now? He asked, his voice lowering. You've put yourself on some pedestal. And for what? You think you've built something better than what we gave you? I wasn't sure how to answer that. Maybe part of me did think I was better off now. I had a life of my own. One where I didn't have to shrink myself to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. But I didn't want to say that. I didn't want to make this conversation any harder than it already was. I never said I was better than you, I said, my voice quieter now. But I don't have to keep living like I'm invisible, either. There was another pause, this one stretching longer. Then, finally, my father spoke again. You're being dramatic. This is all just a phase. You'll get over it. I could feel the anger starting to rise in my chest, but I pushed it down. Maybe it's not a phase, Dad. Maybe I'm just finally seeing things clearly. I'm not going to keep playing by your rules. I could hear his chair scraping against the floor, and for a moment, I thought he might hang up. But instead, he spoke in a lower, more controlled voice. You think you're the only one who's been hurt. You think you're the only one who's ever been overlooked or dismissed. I stayed silent, letting the weight of his words settle between us. I could feel the old patterns starting to creep back in, the ones where I'd try to explain myself or make him understand. But I wasn't going to do that anymore. Not this time. I'm not coming back for New Year's, I said, the words coming out steady. I'm done pretending everything's fine. I'm not coming back to a table where I'm not even seen. If you want to fix this, we need to sit down as equals. No more hierarchies. No more pretending I'm nothing. Another silence. This one felt heavier, like my father was finally realizing that I wasn't backing down. He said finally, his voice tight, "We'll talk when you're ready. But don't expect me to beg." I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm not asking you to beg. I'm asking you to listen. The line went dead. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time, the phone still in my hand. The silence of the apartment wrapping around me like a blanket. I wasn't sure what to feel. I wasn't sure what to do with the emotions swirling inside me. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going back to the way things were. I wasn't going to keep pretending that my family's version of love was the only kind that mattered. The world outside was still. The lights of Seattle twinkled in the distance, but the city felt small now, almost empty. My father's words echoed in my mind, but I wasn't afraid of them anymore. I wasn't afraid of anything. The phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Grandma Eleanor. You did the right thing, sweetheart. I'm proud of you. It wasn't the kind of validation I had been waiting for, but it was the kind that mattered. The kind I needed. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. I was standing my ground. And that was enough. As I looked out at the city, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. Something all my own. I thought that call from my father would be the hardest part. But in reality, it was just the beginning. The days following that conversation were filled with a strange tension. Like something was waiting to break. I wasn't sure what it would look like, but I knew it was coming. The silence in my apartment felt louder than it had before, as though everything I had built in my new life was standing on the edge of a precipice. I had drawn a line in the sand, but would I have the strength to stand firm when the world, or my family, came pushing against it? I didn't have to wait long. A week later, my parents arrived in Seattle. The knock on the door was softer than I expected. A quiet tap that somehow felt heavier than the loud, demanding calls of the past. I stood frozen for a moment, my hand resting on the doorknob. I wasn't sure what I was afraid of. Maybe I was afraid of their disappointment, their anger. Maybe I was afraid that I wasn't strong enough to hold my ground. When I opened the door, I saw them standing there, awkwardly shifting on their feet. My father's eyes flickered across the room, searching for something to criticize, his gaze quickly scanning the walls, the furniture, as if measuring everything to make sure it fit his idea of what was acceptable. My mother, on the other hand, didn't meet my eyes. She looked at the floor, her hands tightly clasped in front of her. She hadn't changed. She was still the same woman who had never stood up for me. Still the same woman who had let my father dictate everything. "Nice place," my father muttered, as if the words tasted strange in his mouth. I didn't respond. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. I had spent too long being silent for his comfort. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let them pass. They sat at the small table in my living room. The one I had carefully chosen, the one that didn't have a head seat. Just 3 identical chairs. It was my declaration of equality. My rebellion against the hierarchy that had governed my family for so long. My father didn't comment on the table, but I could feel the tension in the air. He didn't like it. He didn't like not being in charge. But he stayed quiet for now. My mother, on the other hand, gave a faint compliment about the meal I had prepared, but it wasn't enough to break the silence. I could tell she was nervous, trying to find the right words, but she wasn't ready to face what had happened. She never was. We ate in silence for a while. The sound of silverware clinking on plates the only noise in the room. My father seemed to be in his own world, chewing mechanically, his jaw clenched. My mother picked at her food, glancing up only occasionally, as if to make sure we were all still there. Finally, after what felt like hours, my father broke the silence. "So, you're doing well," he said, his voice flat. I looked at him, trying to gauge his expression. There was something there, something that wasn't quite anger but more like resignation. Maybe even defeat. For the first time, I wasn't the one who felt small. "Yes, I am," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And you didn't think to tell us," he added, the words sharp. I didn't answer right away. What was there to say? I had tried, over and over again, to get their attention. I had tried to show them that I was more than just a shadow in their world. But they hadn't wanted to see me. So why would I share my successes with them now? "You never wanted to hear it," I said quietly. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might snap. But he didn't. Instead, he looked away. Almost like he was processing something. He looked small in that moment, smaller than I had ever seen him. "I know we didn't do everything right," he said, his voice quieter now, almost humble. It didn't feel like an apology, but it was something. A crack, at least. My mother, who had been so silent throughout the meal, suddenly spoke up. "Nora, we never meant to make you feel less." Her voice trembled slightly, and I could hear the guilt in it. It was the first time in my life I had heard her acknowledge the weight of her silence, the way she had let my father control everything. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Not after everything. I set my fork down, my hands steady. "Intentions don't erase impact," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You protected Mason. You gave him everything, but I had to survive on my own." For a moment, my father didn't speak. His mouth opened, then closed, like he didn't know how to respond. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the conflict between the man he wanted to be and the man he was. And for the first time, I realized that this wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about getting them to apologize or even to change. It was about me finally telling the truth. The truth that I had carried for so long, hidden beneath layers of silence and fear. I stood up from the table, my body steady. "I'm not coming home," I said, looking at them both. "But you're welcome to visit. If you sit as equals. If you show up the way you didn't before." My father stared at me, his face pale. He didn't say anything, but I could see the realization hitting him. This was different. I was different. I wasn't the same girl who had been desperate for his approval. I wasn't the same person who had spent her whole life waiting for something from him that he would never give. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just real. My father nodded once. It wasn't an agreement, Not really, but it was something. We'll try, he said, his voice low. I didn't respond. There was nothing more to say. I had said what I needed to say. I had drawn the line. And for the first time, they had to deal with the consequences of their actions. When they left, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I had won. But I felt something else, something that had been missing for so long. I felt like I had finally started to rebuild. Not just my life, but myself. I stood by the door as they left, watching them walk down the hall. When the door clicked shut behind them, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I wasn't sure what the future held, or how my family would fit into it, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to keep shrinking for their comfort. I was finally going to live my life the way I needed to. And that was enough. The week after my parents left Seattle was one of reflection. I wasn't sure what had changed. It wasn't that I felt free. I had felt that when I first walked away from my family. But this time, it was different. It felt like a shift, a new kind of stillness in my life. My father's words still echoed in my mind, but now they didn't hold the same weight. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first left Indianapolis. I was learning how to set boundaries, how to keep parts of myself sacred. But I was also learning that change didn't happen all at once. The tension I had been carrying with me for so long was starting to loosen. But it wasn't as simple as just feeling better. It wasn't like I could walk away from my past and forget everything. I had spent so much time trying to make my family see me, trying to earn their love, that I had forgotten what it meant to simply be seen for who I was. And even now, I was still finding my way back to that. I decided that I needed to take action. I couldn't just keep waiting for something to shift. I had already made the choice to stay in Seattle, to carve out a life for myself, but I also knew that my journey wasn't over. I hadn't finished rebuilding. In fact, I wasn't sure if I ever would. But that was okay. I realized that the process of rebuilding wasn't just about fixing things. It was about learning to live in the cracks, the spaces between what had been and what could be. One morning, after an early meeting at work, I found myself walking through the city. Letting the cool air and the quiet hum of Seattle's streets help clear my mind. It was peaceful, the kind of peaceful I had never known in my parents' house. I was walking to the cafe down the street when I bumped into Marcus. He had a coffee cup in hand, his smile warm as he greeted me. "Busy day?" he asked, taking a sip of his coffee. I shrugged. "Just the usual." We started walking together, side by side, not saying much but comfortable in the silence. I wasn't sure when it happened, but I felt like I had started to trust him in a way I hadn't trusted anyone in a long time. Maybe it was the way he let me be myself, or maybe it was because he didn't ask questions when I wasn't ready to answer them. I could feel the weight of my past, but with him, it didn't feel so heavy. It didn't feel like it defined me. We turned a corner and found a bench near the water, overlooking the skyline. It was a cold day, but the view was beautiful. The sky was a soft gray, the water beneath us calm and steady. We sat in silence for a while, just watching the world go by. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed?" Marcus asked, breaking the quiet. I didn't answer right away. The question wasn't easy. It brought up so many things I didn't want to think about. What if I had stayed in Indianapolis? What if I had kept trying to fix things with my family? What if I had spent my life waiting for something that would never come? But I realized something in that moment. It didn't matter what would have happened if I had stayed. What mattered was that I was here, right now. In this moment, I was building something for myself, and I didn't need anyone else's approval to do it. "I don't know," I said slowly. "I think I had to leave. I had to stop pretending that things would change. And now, I don't feel like I'm waiting for permission to live. Marcus nodded, his gaze on the water. That's a good place to be, he said quietly. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel the old walls I used to put up around myself. I felt like I could let him in, like I could let someone else see me for who I really was, not the version of myself I had been hiding behind. Yeah, I said softly. I think I'm getting there. We stayed on the bench for a while longer, not talking, just watching the world go by. In those quiet moments, I realized that I didn't need to have it all figured out. I didn't need to rush the process of healing or rebuilding. I could take it slow, piece by piece, and let things unfold in their own time. When we finally stood to leave, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known before. I wasn't going back to the way things were. I wasn't going to shrink myself for anyone anymore. And I wasn't going to wait for someone else to tell me I was enough. I had already decided that for myself. The days after Marcus, and I had that conversation, felt like a turning point. But the truth was, I wasn't sure where I was headed. It wasn't that I wasn't happy with my life in Seattle. I was. I had built something here that felt solid, even if it was just beginning to take shape. But a quiet part of me still carried the weight of the past, like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. I had let my family go, but I hadn't fully let go of the need for their approval, their validation. Maybe that was something I had to work through on my own, but I wasn't ready to face it just yet. One Sunday afternoon, as I was sitting at my desk, going through some emails, I saw a message that made my heart skip a beat. It was from my mother. It had been months since I heard from her, and while I wasn't surprised that my father hadn't reached out, I didn't expect this. The subject line simply read, "Can we talk?" My first instinct was to ignore it, to delete it, to keep my boundaries firm, just like I had been doing. But something in me couldn't do that. I found myself clicking on the message, my fingers shaking as I read it. Dear Nora, I've been thinking about you a lot. I know I haven't been there when you needed me, and I know I've failed you in more ways than I can count. But I don't want you to think that I don't care. I do. I want to talk. If you're willing to listen, I'm ready to hear you. I sat back in my chair, the words swimming in front of me. She sounded sincere, but was it enough? Was it enough to make me want to open that door again? I wasn't sure. I thought about everything that had happened. About all the years of silence. All the times she let my father control the narrative. All the moments she could have stepped in but didn't. I thought about how she had never really seen me, never really fought for me. She had been as passive as a shadow, content to follow along with whatever my father wanted. Could I trust that she had truly changed? Could I trust her now? I stared at the email for what felt like hours, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to write back right away, to tell her everything I had been holding back for so long. Another part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep the distance between us, but I knew that I couldn't avoid it forever. Finally, I typed a response. It was simple, honest. I didn't have all the answers, and I wasn't ready to forgive everything, but I needed to start somewhere. Mom, I've been thinking a lot, too, and I'm open to talking, but I need to be honest with you. There's a lot of hurt between us, and I'm not sure how to fix it. But I'll listen. Let's take it one step at a time. I hit send and sat back, my breath coming in shallow bursts. What had I just done? I had opened a door I thought I had closed for good. Was I ready for that? I wasn't sure. But the reality was, if I was going to heal, if I was going to move forward, I had to face the things that had held me back. And that meant facing her, facing the past, and finding some way to reconcile the two. The next day, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. It was simple. How's everything going? I stared at the message, feeling a rush of gratitude. It was a small gesture, but it meant more to me than he could know. He wasn't asking about my family or pressing me for details. He was just there, checking in, like he always did. I typed back quickly. I heard from my mom today. She wants to talk. Marcus didn't reply immediately, but when he did, his words were steady and sure. That's a big step. You don't have to figure it all out in one conversation. Just take it one moment at a time. His words comforted me in a way I didn't expect. I wasn't ready to dive into everything with my mom, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. But I knew that I wasn't doing it alone. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a support system. I wasn't facing this on my own. That evening, after finishing my work for the day, I sat in my living room, the city lights casting soft shadows on the walls. I thought about what Marcus had said, about taking things one step at a time. I had spent so many years trying to fix everything all at once. I had tried to please my parents, to make them proud, to prove that I was worth their love. But now, I was learning that I didn't have to fix it all at once. I didn't have to carry it all by myself. The next day, I sent a message to my mom, asking if we could meet in person. I didn't know what would happen, or if we would ever find common ground. But I was ready to start the process. I was ready to see where it would take me. And as I sat in that quiet moment, I realized something important. I didn't need to go back to the way things were. I didn't need to keep fighting for approval. I had already built my own life, one that was mine, and that was enough. The next step wasn't about fixing my family. It was about making peace with the fact that I didn't need them to validate me anymore. Whatever happened next, I was ready to face it, one step at a time. The morning after I sent my message to my mom, I woke up to a quiet sense of anticipation. The phone had stayed silent all night. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel a gnawing sense of unease about it. I had made the choice to reach out, and now there was nothing left to do but wait. I spent the day keeping myself busy. Work was a welcome distraction, with deadlines and meetings that filled my thoughts. But every time I looked at my phone, my heart would skip. Would she respond today? Would this be the moment everything shifted? I didn't know. I couldn't know. I had given up so much of my life waiting for them to see me, waiting for the validation I thought I needed. But now, I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Maybe I just needed to see if I could do this, handle the mess, face the past, without falling apart. By the time evening rolled around, the silence was louder than I expected. I had started to settle into the idea that maybe she wouldn't respond, that maybe the distance was for the best. And then, just as I was about to turn off my phone for the night, a message popped up. It was from my mom. "Let's meet tomorrow, if you're ready. I'll be at the diner at noon." I stared at the message, feeling a mix of emotions flood through me. Relief, fear, hope. I had done the work to get here. I had drawn the line, and I wasn't going to let my fear drag me back to the same old patterns. But even now, with all the progress I had made, the idea of facing my family felt like a monumental task. I didn't respond immediately. I let the message sit for a few minutes while I took a deep breath. The next day, I found myself at the diner, the same small, quiet place where I used to go with Grandma. The scent of fresh coffee and baked goods filled the air, but it didn't feel familiar this time. The world around me felt distant, like I was seeing everything for the first time. When I stepped inside, I saw my mom sitting at a corner booth, her hands folded in front of her. She looked different than I remembered. There was a wariness in her face, but also a softness, something I hadn't seen in years. "Hey, Mom," I said, my voice steady but unsure. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine. For a moment, there was no need for words. It was as if everything we had avoided was suddenly out in the open, but there was no anger, no shame, just the rawness of the years between us. "Nora?" she said softly, her voice shaking slightly. "I've missed you." I sat down across from her, unsure of what to say. What could I say after everything that had happened? After all the silence and all the hurt? "I've missed you too," I said, the words surprisingly easy to say. It felt true, even though I knew we had a long road ahead. We sat in silence for a few moments, each of us sorting through the emotions that had been kept hidden for so long. Then, she spoke again, her voice quieter now. "I'm sorry, Nora," she said. "I know I failed you. I never meant to hurt you. I was just scared. Scared of making things worse. Scared of losing your father's approval. But I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry for that." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had always wanted her to say something like this, but now that she had, it didn't feel like the relief I thought it would be. It felt like something else. Something that had been missing for so long. Acknowledgement. I had spent so many years feeling invisible. Feeling like my pain didn't matter. But hearing her say those words, hearing her admit her failure, made something shift inside me. "I know you did what you thought was best," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "But I need you to understand something. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I couldn't keep shrinking myself to fit into a place that wasn't mine." She nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I understand. I never should have let things get this far. I should have stood up for you, and I'm so sorry I didn't." I felt a lump form in my throat, but I didn't let the tears fall. I wasn't ready to cry yet. I wasn't sure I would ever be ready to forgive everything. But in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't about fixing everything all at once. It wasn't about erasing the years of hurt or making things go back to how they were. It was about moving forward, step by step. It was about acknowledging the pain, but not letting it define me anymore. "I'm not ready to forgive everything," I said, the words coming out slow but steady. "But I'm willing to try. For both of us." She nodded, tears finally spilling over. "I'll do whatever it takes to make it right, Nora. I want to be part of your life again." I didn't know if we could fix everything. I didn't know if I could ever fully trust her again. But I realized something that afternoon in the diner. I wasn't doing this for her. I wasn't doing this to make her feel better. I was doing it for me, because I had finally started to see my own worth, and I wasn't going to let my past dictate my future. We didn't talk much more that day, but as we parted ways, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected. It wasn't an end, it wasn't even a beginning. But it was something. A new chapter. One where I wasn't fighting for approval anymore. One where I didn't have to shrink myself to fit into someone else's version of who I should be. I walked out of that diner and into a new phase of my life. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time, that was enough.